Hi, I'm Ron Spurnberg, co-founder and CEO of Hi Mama. Welcome to our podcast about all things early childhood education. In this week's episode, we get a first-hand view into just how impactful quality preschool education can be for a young child. In this powerful conversation with Liz Huntley, we hear about Liz's childhood, being raised by her grandmother after her father's incarceration and her mother's suicide. Ultimately, the affection, stimulation, and support she received through her preschool program saved her life and set her on a path to become a truly inspirational advocate for high-quality pre-K, as well as a successful litigation attorney at Lightfoot, Franklin & White in Birmingham, Alabama. She has also since recounted her childhood in her memoir, More Than a Bird. If you're looking for inspiration on how you can lead an impactful career as an early childhood educator through a powerfully emotional journey, then stay tuned for this week's episode of the Preschool Podcast. Liz, welcome to the Preschool Podcast. It's so great to have you as a guest.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, Liz, you're a lawyer in Alabama. Now, why are you passionate about child advocacy and early childhood education?
Well, I think the question is, why shouldn't everybody be passionate about it? I am a lawyer and a business person, but also a huge advocate for pre-K in our state because I personally understand why it works. You know, I get all of the business case for why it works. I know that we save several dollars on the dollar for what we invest in children early versus what we do on the back end from a remedial perspective. I understand that, companies looking at industry placement in different areas across the world, they look to see if there's early investment in early childhood because they understand the value of it. They understand the numbers and understand the impact on developing a good, highly skilled workforce. But I'm passionate about it because I'm actually a product of it. I mean, I grew up in a situation that no child should have ever survived, and had it not been for early childhood, I certainly wouldn't be a successful lawyer today.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that story?
Sure. So both my parents were drug dealers, and we lived in a housing project in a rural area, not rural, actually it was an urban area in Alabama called Huntsville, Alabama, and they weren't married, but my mother had 5 children. We all lived there. We had 4 different fathers. She'd given birth to us from age 16 to 21. So by all purposes, it was a very dysfunctional situation. What's interesting about that is clearly, a kid doesn't realize that they're in dysfunction because it's their home and their mom and dad are there, so they don't get it, and I didn't. But when I was 5, my mother ended up committing suicide after my dad went to prison for dealing drugs. And she packed us all up and took me and my younger sister down to a little rural community called Clanton, Alabama, to live with our grandmother, paternal grandmother. And while I was there in dealing with the mother committing suicide, the dad in jail, I was also a sexually abused child when I went to that home. I was literally withdrawn. I fit every bit of the stereotypes that you hear of children that experience severe traumatic events, and now what we know in science about what it does to their neurology. But we also know in science that if you put a child in a nurturing environment for any period of time, in spite of the fact that they may continue to experience these traumatic events like I was experiencing, then that child can end up becoming very resilient and learn. And that's exactly what happened to me. My grandmother sent me to this local preschool program where they had licensed teacher. It was high quality early childhood education, and in that program I thrived. Now what was interesting about that was, as a child, I was really just responding to the love I received from the teachers, the nurturing, the way they got excited about how I learned, because in many ways, they were giving me what I wasn't getting at home. Because after all, we know children learn from adults. I mean, they learn in how people respond to what they do, how they determine what's the good behavior, not good behavior, and I was no exception. And fortunately for me, I was in this wonderful preschool where I learned a lot of good behaviors. And also, my potential was tapped into, and learned that I was actually a very bright child. In fact, I was doing smart stuff for these teachers because they loved on me. It was a quid pro quo, and I ended up doing so much smart stuff that I became valedictorian in my kindergarten class, and I wasn't even trying to be valedictorian in my kindergarten class. I was literally just responding to this stimulating, nurturing environment. And so what ended up happening is it laid a foundation for me for the rest of my life. It made me love school. It made it become the refuge place, the place where I could thrive. And that education became key to me breaking the cycle of poverty in my family.
Can you remember any specifics about your time in that preschool program? I mean, you were so young, but can you remember any specific experiences?
I remember lots of experiences, but the one that's most impactful to me was the first day. Because as I described myself, here I was, this child being sexually abused, mother committed suicide, dad in jail. My grandmother was very, very poor. She cleaned houses for a living. And, I'd gone from having all this stuff, with drug dealing parents because, contrary to popular demand, drug dealers have a lot of cash. So you get a lot of stuff, And, to go into the situation with my grandmother where it was crowded in the home because she had other adult children living there. We were in the housing projects. We had, dirt for lawns and cinder block walls, that we slept in and lived in. And it was a really tough situation. And as I described, what I now know through science, that neurological impact on me, I became withdrawn and, I hung my head. I didn't look up when I spoke to people. I mumbled when I talked. I mean, just this really introverted, gone into a shell type child. And so when my grandmother sent me down to the school, I had no idea how people were going to respond to me. I was embarrassed about my situation. And although I had not told anyone about the sexual abuse because my perpetrator threatened me if I did, I still felt like people knew. I mean, I felt dirty, like a used rag doll. So I remember going down to the school because my grandmother told me I had to go, and it was a free. We certainly would have been able to afford high quality pre-K, which is why I'm such an advocate for making sure it's accessible to all children, because I understand what a game changer it is. So this program was free. It was provided through a local community action grant. And I walked into the building, this dejected child, head hung. And I remember looking up and looking around the room, and I almost smiled because I looked around this room, and it was so beautiful. It was so bright and colorful, nothing like anything I was experiencing on a daily basis. It literally screamed stimulation, come in here and learn with me. And, and I remember kind of thinking to myself, this is for us, I mean, we've got, because you think about where you live in your neighborhood, and then you walk into this beautiful space that is so, catering to little kids, had little bitty desks that were just my height, little bitty workstations. It was just perfect. And I remember kind of smiling. But when those preschool teachers came up to me and they said, "Come on in here, baby," and they put their arms around me and hugged me, and they got down on their knees and they were looking in my eyes and calling me by my name and being so engaged with me for the first time in my little fragile life at that moment, I actually felt relevant. I mean, I felt relevant. I felt like someone cared. Like someone cared how I felt, how I thought, what I thought, that someone was excited when I learned new things and I rose to the challenges that were put in front of me. And I tell you, as a kid that was starving for that, that was a game changer for my life. It really was. So that first day, I'll never forget it. I mean, just feeling like, this is a safe, good place for me. It was pretty powerful.
Do you suspect that the teachers there knew anything about your background and treated you differently, or do you just think that they treated every child like that and you just had that experience?
Well, no, I think they treated every child like, because I witnessed it. I mean, to this day, we all, that grew up in that neighborhood and went to that preschool still adore. There's a couple of them that are still alive, and and they're some of the most adored people in our community that they just love children, and had a natural passion for children. I think they were well trained teachers, and they clearly had, great curriculum. I remember it being very structured, and high quality pre-K is almost chaos within structure, because the environment in high quality is set up in such a way to stimulate learning through play and interaction. It's not rigid, rote, worksheets and memorization and reciting things. And
Absolutely.
so I think it takes a certain type of personality as an educator to be able to navigate those waters to function in what I call organized chaos in pre-K classrooms, because you have 4-year-olds that are, kind of all over the place doing their thing, but at the same time they're learning, and they're learning to become critical thinkers and learning to apply the knowledge that they do know in very fun and engaging ways. It's so powerful.
And so I suspect when you woke up every morning, you were really looking forward to going to this environment.
Oh, that's an understatement. When you were in the hellhole that I was in, there was no sleeping in or anybody having to wake me up or you need to go to school. No, sir. I mean, I was ready to go. It was my place.
And it's great that you've stayed in touch with some of these teachers over time. And I'm sure the greatest reward of all for them is seeing yourself and hopefully others who have been able to thrive as a result of your experience in these programs.
It is, and I what was interesting when I ran into one of my preschool teachers at an event back in June. And, now that I speak all over the country with my story and my book and everything, she finally knows the story behind Liz, what was going on with that little child that she had in her classroom. And when she saw me after she'd read the book, she came up and she hugged me and she cried and she said, "Sweetheart, I didn't know." And she said, "And how would I?" She said, "You were always so bright-eyed and happy and engaging and learning. And, it's like you were like a sponge. I mean, we could never give you enough." And I looked at her and I said, "Well, that was because I loved it. I absolutely loved being in this environment where I could just be a kid and I could be stimulated in that way that they did." And she said, "There's just no way anyone on the outside looking in to our classroom could have known that you were a child going home to the terrible things that you were having to endure and experience." And, she told me, I regret that I didn't know. I would have done something.
Oh, but I think that just speaks a little bit to my earlier question of, they treated everyone the same and with equal diligence in terms of providing you with a stimulating environment to thrive. And so, kudos to those educators for what they did. I mean, that's phenomenal. And I think if this is a story of inspiration to say, what you do as an early childhood educator can have a massive impact on the children you work with, then this is one. And I mean, think about how many others there must be, right?
Well, and here's the other piece that I say sometimes, and when I start my presentation and I say this, they think that's a little overreaching. And I'll say, this literally saved my life. This experience, going to this preschool, saved my life. And then I connect the dots of the science, because the way that I was, outwardly expressing myself physically and emotionally in response to the traumatic events that I was suffering through, I was on that path, to where the neurology was going to take over and information was not going to get through to the frontal cortex. I mean, without having a full science lesson, we know this in neurology now, that that's what happens to kids that go through traumatic events. And the only thing that can buffer and offset that and reverse those effects is a nurturing environment. That's it. There's no pill. There's no magical therapy session. I mean, it's a nurturing environment, and it's been proven in science. So, preschools are not just places of learning and development, they're places of healing for so many children.
It's crazy the scale of the impact of that nurturing environment.
It's amazing. And so I tell people, it literally saved my life, because let's take that out of my life before I went to public school and regular school, and I didn't have that foundation to be school ready. I would have walked into my school building a different child. And what it let me do when I walked in my school building is even more amazing, because when I got up the morning to go to public school, and we were still going through integration in my community at the time, so everybody was a little nervous about going. Here I am, 6 years old, going to first grade, and my grandmother looked at me and she said, "Elizabeth, I want you to go over to that school, and I want you to tell the teacher to put an X everywhere I need to sign on the paperwork, send it back home, and I'll send it back tomorrow." So it dawned on me, my grandma's about to send me to this school by myself, and I'm 6 years old. So, but I'm terrified, my grandma, I don't dare, say no or no ma'am. So I get on the bus and I go over to the school, just scared to death. Well, I get off the bus and I walk into the school, and I walk into the correct side of the building where the first grade module was, and I looked on the wall and I saw it said first grade. And I thought to myself, well, I'm going to first grade. I must be in the right place. Well, how did I know it said first grade? Because of that preschool. That had taught me that. So I stood there a little longer, and I saw parents come in with their children, and they would scroll down the little list of the classroom assignments, and they'd say, "Oh, little Susie, you're in such and such a room," and so they'd go off into the module where they were supposed to go. And I observed that, and I thought to myself, well, my name's got to be up there. I'm going to first grade. So I got on my little tippy toes, and I scrolled down those lists until I found my name. And I saw my name and what room number I was supposed to go into. Well, how did I know how to read, write, and spell my name? How did I know how to navigate from room to room and understand room numbers? Because of that preschool. So I go into the room that I'm supposed to sit in, and I sit in the front desk, because the ladies at the preschool told me don't nothing good happen in the back of the classroom. When you get to school, you better sit in the front desk. So imagine if I can take you there. Here I am, sitting, this little kid with pigtails, from the project, sitting in this front desk, not saying a word, kind of waiting on class to start, because I don't know what to do to register myself for the first day of school.
Sure.
And the teacher's in there, and little Johnny's at the door holding on to mama's skirt, not wanting to go in. I mean, because at this time we didn't have kindergarten in public schools. It was all everybody's first day, white, black, rich, poor, was first grade. So it was the chaos of the first day of school for all children. And that environment. You're going to have some kids that are school ready and some that aren't, And so I'm sitting there, and eventually the teacher notices me, and she started to walk towards me. Now, I have to tell you, my heart started racing, because this woman, this teacher, looked just like Wonder Woman. Like Linda Carter Wonder Woman, which is my dream to meet her someday. Because, every kid kind of needs a superhero, especially a victimized kid. And during that time, this was the mid-'70s, and it was when the Wonder Woman show was on TV. And so I watched it religiously every week. And, I had visions in my mind of Wonder Woman coming with the gold cuffs and the rope around her waist and saving me from the bad people, And so when my teacher looked like Wonder Woman, I thought in my little mind, could this be? Is my teacher Wonder Woman? Well, it wasn't Wonder Woman. It was Miss Pam Jones. But she was my Wonder Woman, because, early childhood to me goes through second grade. I mean, that's that, 7, 8 years old, right. That critical development time from that birth to 6, 7 years old. And so she looked at me and said, well, hello, young lady, what is your name? Well, of course, I panicked. I didn't know what to do. And I had rehearsed everything my grandmother said, so all I could say when she asked me was, my name's Elizabeth Humphrey, and my grandma told me to tell you to put an X everywhere I need to sign on the paperwork, send it back home, and I'll send it back tomorrow. I just spit it out. And she paused, and she looked at me, and we had a little exchange about how I'd found my way into the room. I explained seeing first grade on the wall and finding my name on the classroom assignment list and everything. Now, you know that a lot of things could have happened in that moment, a lot of things that would have changed the course of time. You know, she could have seen my glass as half empty, looking at my family situation. Here I am, this 6-year-old kid at school by myself. But because of that preschool bringing out my potential, she saw my glass as half full. She saw a kid that was bright, that was clearly resilient, that had navigated her way, being put on a bus at 6 years old to find her way into her classroom. You know, by all accounts, acting way better than the kids that were there with mamas and daddies with them in tow, you know. And she was so impressed by that and taken by that moment that this lady with tears in her eyes looked down in my face and said to me, "Elizabeth Humphrey, you're going to be the brightest student I ever have."
No.
That's how powerful that preschool was. Because let's take it away and send me to school that first day of school and not being school ready the way that I was because of that preschool. I'm telling you, it changed my life. And
yeah, literally the things about reading comprehension and understanding the problem solving pieces, but also it sounds like the confidence level was a huge factor as well, which may not have been there without that pre-K experience.
Well, and trust of educators. That's another piece. You know, I could have been very distrustful of this woman and not really sure, because when she said what she said to me, in my little mind, I was thinking to myself, oh, well, I think this is going to be like preschool. All I got to do is smart stuff and she'll love on me. Because that's how you process things as a child like that. And that's literally what I thought in this moment. I mean, she seemed just as nice and engaging as the ladies I had experienced in preschool. And in my little processing way, well, this is going to be the same way. And it was. I mean, I did smart stuff and she loved on me. I mean, and I didn't take it as laying a great educational foundation in my little mind at the time. I'm just a little kid trying to survive, and this is a happy place, you know?
Wow. Well, it's a powerful story. I mean, it really takes home your first point of why aren't we all passionate about early childhood education? You know, and hearing your story is certainly something that can inspire you to become passionate. Now, currently, you're also doing some work related to expanding high-quality pre-K in Alabama. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, it's very exciting times in Alabama. We're so proud that for the 10th year in a row, by near standards, we've been ranked as number one in quality. And
amazing.
Yes, and we're really proud of that. And a lot of it has to do with the leadership surrounding expanding high quality pre-K in the state. I can't say that I take credit for being on that initial team. I was a couple of years into them really working on this project when I was asked to join the business leadership team that wanted to put together a task force to really work towards getting this high-quality pre-K expanded to all of our 4-year-olds in Alabama. And what we're doing is we've got a business-led task force of leaders, people both in the education field and the political field and, the faith-based arena, as that's a big part of Alabama, and in the business field that are all come together to put forth a plan for Alabama financially to be able to support expanding high-quality pre-K access to all 4-year-olds in Alabama. And right now we have access to about 25% of our 4-year-olds to what we know for sure is high quality, is administered through our Alabama Department of Early Childhood Ed. And the delivery of those programs are just amazing. We have a diverse delivery system. People that apply for the grants for the high-quality pre-K, it can be private child care, it can be faith-based, it can be in a school setting, and or community center setting. That's been very beneficial to us because we're able to bring the program to where the 4-year-olds are, versus setting up some program where people are having to get to us. And it's been extremely successful. The data and the results have been powerful. They speak for themselves, but we all know that wherever there's high quality, you're going to get those results. I mean, there's nothing unique to Alabama about that. That's par for the course. You do it right, kids are going to learn, and you're going to see the results in third grade when they start testing. And it's just been very successful. We've got a lot of bipartisan leadership and buy-in from the legislature. We're year 4 into what we call our 10-year track for full expansion. And it's a voluntary program, so nobody's required to go. But, of course, most of those places have a waiting list, of kids that want access to it because those parents see the result of it for the kids that do get to go. So it's a good thing that's going on in Alabama, and I'm happy to serve on the executive board for Alabama School Readiness Alliance, which is the grassroots organization that sort of runs this effort in the state, and also as one of the spokespersons for the program that goes around the state and promotes it with business leaders and communities and help them come up with their own creative local ways, to try to jumpstart their own process for expanding quality access to their 4-year-olds. Very exciting times.
Awesome. And what do you see as one of the most exciting things for the future of early childhood education?
I think what I see most is the impact I think it's going to have on the quality of life for children. Because if you have high quality early, you can identify things early. I mean, most of the high quality programs have screening programs. You can identify any kind of a true learning disability. Sometimes I think things that are characterized later in elementary school as learning disabilities really are developmental delays because, kids haven't been exposed to certain things. And, and we truly, by tapping into them early and letting them start to develop and learn early, I think we can identify things sooner rather than later that might be going on with children. And it becomes a game changer like it was for me in terms of impacting their quality of life. And I just think about the child that wouldn't be exposed to reading, wouldn't be exposed to any kind of academic learning unless maybe the parents set them in front of Sesame Street, which, by the way, is still a great tool. I use it for my children. Unless, that happens, they don't get that engagement and they're not stimulated. And so you go to a school for the first time, not school ready, and you're sitting in a sea of children that are, you start to define yourself in a very poor light when really there's nothing wrong with you. You may be smarter than those other kids, just nobody tapped into it early for you to display it the way that they can. And, so when you think about, to me, the most exciting thing is the quality of life piece that it's going to do for the children that get to go to school ready, that wouldn't have had it otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Liz, thanks so much for coming on the show. If I want to look you up online because I want to learn more about what you're doing, where can I find you?
Just at lizhuntley.com. Very easy.
Awesome. Liz, thank you so much for sharing your story, and thanks so much for your continued contributions to accessible, high-quality pre-K in Alabama as well. I think it's amazing work that you're doing out there.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
And last but not least, whether it's in the classroom or the boardroom, I really hope that some of our listeners are going to be inspired by your story to also make a difference in the lives of our young children, in particular those at risk. I know I'm inspired by this story, and I'm going to work that much harder to make a difference for our young children everywhere. So thanks again, Liz.
Thank you.
What's your name?
Michaela.
Michaela. How are you?
Hi.
You having fun playing?
Yes.
It's a nice day, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. What's your favorite thing to play out here?
Playing monsters.
You like to play monsters? Do you like the swings? Okay. What else you like to do?
Play my Dora bike.
Oh, with your Dora bike? Oh, okay. Do you ride fast?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Well, have fun here. All right.